The issue of animal agriculture actually impacts not only our water bodies, but it actually is, by UN statistics, not my statistics, by UN statistics, it's the single greatest contributor to global warming. The UN released a report in 1996 called Livestock's Long Shadow about how the livestock industry, the breeding of animals specifically to be eaten, not some family has a farm, they've got a cow, they've got some chickens, but the industrialization of the industry is the single greatest contributor to what was at that time called the greenhouse effect. We now call it climate change. And the reasons for that are huge. I won't spend all night doing this because I could. It's one of my favorite topics. But since we're talking water, I'll just give you one statistic, which is that the amount of fresh water that goes into the production of one meal of beef is the same amount of water that you would use in bathing for 6 months. And not bathing the way they bathe in India, where they fill up one bucket and bathe from it, but the bathing of a shower head that's turned on that goes for 8 continuous minutes every day for 6 months. The amount of water that you would use in 6 months is the same amount of water that goes into one meal of beef. Because, so many aspects, quickly. The trees are being deforested in order to graze them. Well, so as we cut the trees, we lose a source of water. Trees actually don't only give us oxygen and fruit and shade, but they actually are a phenomenal giver of water. So in the cutting of them, we lose that water. But then, of course, the animals have to eat something, so that which they eat is produced. The production of anything, whether it's grain, whether it's grass, most of it's grain for them, takes water. The animals themselves drink water. The animals themselves are bathed in water. And then when they're ultimately killed, the sheer amount of water that has to go into separating flesh from blood, from feces, from urine, from all of that is exorbitant. And what you end up with is, pound for pound, a meal of beef equals, it's about 10,000 liters, about 2,500 gallons of water, which is approximately what you would use in 6 months of bathing. Chicken is about 1/3 that. And so the question, of course, that those of us who consider ourselves environmental activists have to ask ourselves, because of course none of us is the moral police. I'm not going to sit up here and say, thou shalt eat this or thou shalt not eat that. But the question that we have to really ask ourselves on any level of consciousness, whether we call it spirituality or we call it activism or we call it just humanity, knowing what a water crisis we're facing. Question is, every time I eat beef, am I prepared to go without bathing for 6 months to offset that water usage? Every time I eat chicken, am I prepared to go without bathing for 2 months to offset that water usage? And if not, well, then that opens up a really interesting personal introspection question of, well, then on what level do I feel so much more entitled to the planet's resources than my sisters and brothers? And just one other quick aspect of that, in terms of resources and food, is along with water, it takes 16 times as much grain to produce meat as it does to produce vegetarian food. So if you start with 16 pounds of wheat, rice, soy, corn, and you use that to make bread or pasta or rice or chapatis or whatever our particular favorites may be, you get pound for pound, 16 pounds for 16 pounds. You start with 16 pounds of grain, you get 16 pounds of food. But if you go the meat way, those 16 pounds will yield you only 1 pound of meat. Because as we understand, the vast majority of what we eat gets digested. It's why we can eat pounds and pounds and pounds of food and not actually gain weight, because we're digesting most of it. Well, so do the animals. So pound for pound, by the time they're killed, 16 pounds of grain have gone in for every pound of beef. So again, the question becomes, on a very deep level, and this is an individual question for us all to ask ourselves, is, do I feel entitled to the food of 15 other people? And again, there's no right answer, there's no wrong answer, there's no moral police, but just an introspective question for us to ask ourselves. Am I really prepared to let 15 people go hungry so I can eat meat? And so thank you for raising that question, because yes, in South America, you know, when we think about the Amazon, to most of us who don't know, one would assume that the Amazon was being deforested by oil interests or other development interests. The truth is, it's being deforested by cattle ranchers. Single greatest deforester of the rainforest, the cattle ranchers. So thank you for raising that point.